Wow, this is something I've never done before. I've never actually drawn a drawing from one of my drawings. And in a moment, it will become clear why I finally did this. But firstly, I'm going to tell you straight up what this biggest drawing myth is. Secondly, I'm then going to suggest why I think this drawing practice is so mistakenly thought of as being very helpful in learning to draw. And thirdly, I have a really important observation to make based on this that may just change the way we choose our YouTube how to draw videos in the future. It's a really, really important point if we're a self-taught artist learning to draw and we choose our teaching video. This is a really important point to consider. And then finally, I'm going to spell out in some more detail about why I think this drawing practice is so unhelpful, why it's not going to take us to the place that I believe most people learning to draw are wanting to go. So let's start. The drawing practice, which I think has become the biggest myth in learning to draw, is that copying the work of other artists is a great way to start learning to draw. And I would like to respectfully say it's not. It's not just a poor way to learn to draw, but it will actually actively stop us learning the best practices to develop and improve our drawing skills. It will keep us in a place we're not wanting to be at all in our drawing and will stop us going to the place that we're trying to get to. But let's look quickly at some of the things that make copying from other artists' work seem like a good idea. And firstly, there's just the principle that when we're learning to do something, starting at an easier, less challenging end and working up to more complexity, more challenging situations is a helpful way to go. And in general terms, that's true. But the problem with that here is that copying from a drawing is not a lesser, earlier, easier stage of the skill of learning to draw. It's actually a very different skill altogether. It's the skill of learning to copy, which is not the same as learning to draw. And therefore, the practices that we need to practice to develop the skills that each of those different skills requires will be different. And if I want to learn to draw, then developing the skill of copying by copying the artwork of another artist is not going to teach me the skills I need to draw my own original artworks. And by original, I don't mean necessarily from imagination. I also mean, of course, drawing from photos as well as from life. The skills I need to do that, I do not get from developing copying skills. And secondly, learning to copy is actually easier than learning to draw, than learning to create our own original artworks. Now, why this is will become more obvious when we get to our last point. Thirdly, it is much easier to get a better drawing at the end, and much quicker, I might say, copying from another drawing than it is to get the same result using a reference photo or a scene in front of us. Which means at the end of our drawing session, we have more chance of having a nice drawing, a nice little artwork in our hand if we draw from another drawing than if we draw from a reference. Which is, of course, because the skill of copying is an easier skill to learn than the skill of drawing. This next point about why we might think it's a good idea to copy the work of other artists is if we have a particular artist whose style, the way their drawings look, has really inspired us in some way, has encouraged us in some way, and we really want to learn to draw like them. We really want our lines, our work, to look as if they've done it. And we've seen that what we've begun with doesn't look anything like this work that has inspired us. So what can we do? And it makes sense that somehow if I keep copying the marks the other artists make, that my marks will slowly start to become like their marks. And my fifth reason why copying another artist's work might feel like it's a good idea is quite possibly somewhere, somehow in our past, we've got a memory. The great masters of old would copy the works of earlier great masters. And we may even have been in museums ourselves and seen people with easels set up, copying, presumably as a way of learning to paint, of improving their skills themselves. So if it's good for them, why isn't it good for me? And I think the simple reason is the great masters who were doing that weren't beginners when they were doing it. The people we see in museums, certainly all the people I've seen in museums, are certainly not beginners. It almost invariably is being done by people who are quite advanced in their own skills development, because this is a good way of learning some very specific skills, but it's certainly not a good way of learning to draw. So if the belief that copying from other artworks rather than directly from references is a helpful thing in learning to draw, then let me say that very much is the myth and practice that I think ironically will hold us back more than any other in learning to draw ourselves. So what was I referring to earlier when I said that from this there's a point which may well change the way we choose drawing videos on YouTube? Well, the basic problem with copying from a drawing is that what we're doing is we're copying the marks that we see. I saw there were dots up here, I did dots. I saw there were kind of straight lines together. I saw there were a few kind of bendy lines here, and then under this there was a couple of dots and there was some more lines and so forth. What I'm doing is I'm focusing on the marks, on the lines, and seeking to place them the same way in my drawing. But when I draw from a reference, in other words, when I'm drawing an original drawing, the reference may be a photo, it may be something in front of me, it may be in my mind. But when I'm drawing from a reference, I have to look at what my subject is. I have to work out what marks are going to capture what I see, and probably not capture the actual object as capture the effect the object creates. So I can't possibly draw all these leaves. So I have to work out what marks can I use that will capture the effect of the leaves. I've got, for instance, the effect of shade and shadow on the canopy and on the branches and the trunk. I have to work out what marks can I use to capture that. I've got different foliage here and here. I have to work out what marks can I use to capture the differences in the foliage. And there's certainly different foliage on these trees, although for some reason I didn't draw them in my original drawing. And when I draw from a reference, in many ways it's like translation from one language into another. And that requires creative thinking processes. How do I represent this into this? How do I represent this shade on my tree? How do I make this foliage look different to that foliage? What marks can I make that will do that? And it's this creative thinking that is truly the hardest part of learning to draw. It is not learning to draw a straight line or a curved line. It is not perspective, but it is the translation of reality into marks. I hope you can see the problem with drawing from someone else's drawing, that what we're copying is the creative process that the original artist went through in their mind to translate from reality to marks. But when I copy the marks that they've chosen, I get no practice at doing this myself. In no way am I forced to creatively consider what marks will create the effect, will create in fact the object and the effect of the object that I want. Therefore, if we're watching teaching videos on YouTube to teach us how to draw, if we just see a drawing appear as the artist talks, then we learn nothing about the process
of creatively translating what we see in life into marks and lines on the paper. The best I can do if I'm watching a demo and I can't see the reference is to seek to copy the lines that the artist is putting on the paper. But I'm getting no practice at the process of knowing what marks do I need to create, how do I create them, how do I place them, how do I create effect with them. I'm learning none of that because I can't compare the marks of the artist with the original to get guidance in not the way to represent leaves or branches, but a way to represent leaves and branches. I get the creative output of this particular artist. And as I start to understand the link between what we see and the effect, then I can start to explore my mark making more particularly to create the effect I want, not just in leaves, but in any textured surface. So I believe that if we're wanting to learn to draw, we would do better in our drawing by selecting videos to watch to teach us where we can always see the reference that the artist is using. So we can create this link between what we see and what sort of marks we can use to represent what we see. Building up this knowledge, this experience, this confidence is so important in learning to draw that it cannot be overstated. And sadly, we get no practice at it if we cannot see the reference photo.
So the biggest problem is that fundamentally the skill of copying is not the same skill as the skill of drawing. They're different skills. We get there by different means. They do not end up at the same place. And the superficial similarity does not make them in any way the same, does not give them overlap. Copying does not teach me how to create original drawings at all. So if that's what I want to do, I'm wasting my time in copying drawings because they don't demonstrate or give me opportunity to work in those skills. They totally ignore the observation and creative translation work from real object, whether in a reference or in front of me or in my imagination, into marks onto the paper. And because it's easier and quicker to get a good result copying than drawing originally, it can give me a false sense of my skill development, and then I can get quite discouraged when I discover that I can't then go on to draw the things that I expected to be able to draw from my copied drawings.
And when I draw by copying, I don't learn all the skills that we need to know how to create, to know how to compose, and to use how to interpret our reference into our drawing. We get no practice at, if you like, the responsibility of composing elements and composing effects that will create in some way a sense of visual drama or interest, or at least an effect which we as the artist want to convey. But of course, copying from a drawing, copying lines for lines, I never even see the reference, and I don't get that challenge of what lines, what marks are going to create the effects that I want to see. I get no practice at ways I might choose to modify what I'm seeing in the reference, where I might simplify some areas, where I might make some values lighter or darker. Because it's all been done for me, I just copy it. If I do well, I improve my skills of copying. But otherwise, I'm not advancing my ability to draw from references at all. The problem we have is that we can't just copy this. We have to interpret it, the effects and the impact, into marks on our paper. And how, as individuals, we choose to do that creates our drawing style. It defines how our drawing looks. It's why we can recognize one drawing I've done and another drawing I've done as being both done by me. Finally, if I copy the work of other artists, it certainly brings me within the obligations of copyright law. And simply put, Drawing a copy of an artwork is a copyright infringement of the original artist if I have not got their permission to make that copy. Now, no one's going to know or care if at home I use anything for my own educative drawing purposes. But if I intend to put my finished work into the public domain in any way, such as Instagram or Facebook, TikTok, whatever, then I need to have not just acknowledgement of the original reference, but permission of that copyright owner. In fact, legally, I can't draw from a photograph that I didn't take without the photographer's, the copyright owner's, permission. And this is why on my channel community page, I post my photos I've taken, that I give everyone watching my videos permission to draw, because having taken them, I own the copyright and I can give that permission. And I hope that those many hundreds of photos are a great help for people who otherwise might have trouble finding reference material suitable to where they're at. If we want people to respect our copyright rights, we need to respect the copyright obligations we have towards others. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you found this interesting. I hope you found it helpful. I hope if copying is the way you've been drawing up till now, or is significant in some way in the way you produce drawings, that you at least stop for a moment and think, where am I wanting to end up? Do I want to end up being a very good copyist, or am I wanting to be able to create my own original drawings? And if it's the second, then let me encourage you to shift your drawing practice into areas that will develop the skills you're wanting to get. But look, however you decide to do it, whatever you draw, however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.